This has got to be one of those things where, when I read this, my immediate instinct is to think, okay, this is great. Like, I like this sort of stuff. Why do we not see this pop up with any other players or insiders at a more frequent pace than we did with this thing yesterday? So, we're going over onto Darren Dreger's Twitter account because in the midst of the entire trading saga we had of yesterday, we had like 3 trades in the span of like an hour, and they were all pretty significant trades too. Delorier, Lindholm, and then of course Claude Giroux. We had ourselves this tweet made by Darren Dreger that went out there and stimulated Leafs Nation. Now the reason I say it like that is because the Maple Leafs haven't actually done anything so far at the trade deadline, at least at the time of me recording this audio, and I guess for Darren Dreger's sake, going out there and appeasing the Toronto market by telling the fans, okay, look, this is what your team was doing. It didn't go through, but this is what they were doing. I think there is indeed value in having these types of conversations. So this is what he said on Twitter yesterday. Here's a deal that did not happen. Chicago and Toronto discussed Brandon Hagel and Marc-Andre Fleury to the Leafs for Mrazek, Matthew Knies, and first-round picks. It never reached a stage where Fleury was officially asked to waive, and Toronto declined based off of the futures involved. Toronto sees promise in Woll and Källgren, and most definitely Jack Campbell. It was a massive ask on their futures, and potentially a portion of those futures could be used on shoring up Toronto's D. Turns out, Chicago got a huge return for Hagel from Tampa Bay. And yeah, right? This is cool. I want to see more of this kind of stuff. Okay, look, this player that got traded, these are the other teams that were also talking about this player, and these are the other trade proposals that were brought up there. I know we sort of had a similar thing pop up with Claude Giroux, and we're going to talk about that later in the show, I believe, if there are no other trades to go out there and highlight. But this one was a pretty significant trade that did not go down, and it was at the hands of the Toronto Maple Leafs that it did not so. Petr Mrazek, Marc-Andre Fleury is an idea that we've already discussed before on this YouTube channel. It was one that was brought up by several NHL insiders, I believe, talking about how Petr Mrazek is not really an option to go forward because he's been so bad, he's completely lost his posts, and for the Maple Leafs to head into a playoff series with Jack Campbell and Källgren as the guy, you don't really need Mrazek anymore, barring any injuries. I mean, if worse comes to worse, you still got Zamboni drivers working around in the arena, so you probably do have yourselves an extended backup option that could be a little bit more useful than a Petr Mrazek should you really go out there and look for it. And so, the idea of Mrazek getting sent over to Chicago in some sort of Fleury deal was one that we brought up, but when you start thinking about Brandon Hagel as well, it really makes the conversation more diluted into what could have been. Because Brandon Hagel, back when we reported, I say we as if I'm the insider, no, we talked about it on the YouTube channel because it was reported by Daily Faceoff and Frank Saravelli. Back when we talked about the initial Brandon Hagel trade rumors and the massive asking price that the Blackhawks had set for this guy, Toronto was indeed one of the teams that was involved. It was Toronto, it was Calgary, who else was there? Of course Tampa Bay, because they eventually got the guy. Actually, I don't really know with Tampa Bay whether or not they were in the running at the very beginning, but either way they got the guy, so I guess it doesn't really matter now. But Brandon Hagel went for 2 firsts and 2 very legit depth roster players, and so with that price being what the Chicago Blackhawks got for this guy, it does not surprise me in the slightest when you see, okay, hypothetical trade scenario, Fleury and Hagel to Toronto for what? That what ends up being multiple firsts, Petr Mrazek, and Matthew Knies. Now, the multiple firsts balances out with what the Lightning ended up giving Chicago. I would argue that multiple firsts from Toronto would probably be a bit more valuable than multiple firsts from Tampa Bay, because those multiple Tampa Bay firsts are pretty much like, I mean, I wouldn't be surprised if they were 27th, 28th, 29th overall each. And for the Toronto firsts, that could be somewhere in the early 20s, depending on if they lose in the first round again. So, with Toronto's first being a bit more valuable, that balances out for Brandon Hagel, and I guess you could say the other players getting thrown in there as well. It's just, for Petr Mrazek, he's kind of a negative asset, so I wouldn't really dispute the idea of him maybe balancing the trade out even more with his presence. And then, of course, you have Matthew Knies being one of the better Maple Leafs prospects we have seen in a while. Knies has been so good in the NCAA so far as a big playmaking, scoring forward, and even though he was a guy taken in the second round last year, I mean, he's a point per game in the NCAA, and he was good at the Olympics as well. What more could you ask for out of a second-round pick immediately after getting selected? And so, when it comes to Matthew Knies being one of the more valuable players in the Toronto prospect system, it totally makes sense that the Blackhawks would be asking for that. In fact, there were a whole bunch of other rumors talking about who else teams are interested in when it comes to Toronto, and lo and behold, it's the best prospects in the system. Topi Niemela, Nick Abruzzese, and then you have yourselves Matthew Knies. Of course, teams are going out there and asking Toronto for these players in rental situations. It's just, Toronto's got to be a bit more cautious here. We saw Kyle Dubas getting burned the previous few seasons with first-round picks and rental players that ultimately did not help the team go past the first round. And so now you got to be a bit more cautious and ask yourself, okay, the 2 firsts for Hagel plus Matthew Knies minus the value of a Petr Mrazek kind of goes out there and stabilizes itself as to what the real Hagel deal was. First-round picks and all that, cool. But is that really worth it to upgrade from Petr Mrazek to Marc-Andre Fleury? You also have to take into consideration the salary, which would have to be probably 50%ed. Okay, I could have just said halved right there. And you could debate that the salary retention would also add a significant amount of value to the Chicago side of the deal. Maybe there's a little bit more thrown in there because of that. And then you still need to make sure that Marc-Andre Fleury ends up waiving, which it had already been reported by other insiders that he wouldn't want to for Toronto. So, yeah, there's a reason why Toronto backed out of this one right here. And, I mean, Drager kind of lays it out on the line. The futures, the firsts, the prospect, and Matthew Knies. It's a lot of stuff. And Toronto, I mean, is this really the year where you want to go all in? I guess you kind of have to, but is this the year to do that? And because of their belief in Källgren and Campbell and Woll, it could make sense that, okay, if we're really going to go all in, if this is the time to do that, let's just trade away these prospects and picks for a defenseman instead of a Marc-Andre Fleury who, I mean, he will be competing with Jack Campbell, and hopefully Jack Campbell is able to come back and actually become stable again, but still, defenseman playing 20 minutes a night versus a Fleury who will be competing with a guy that they already believe in, sort of makes sense to see why they didn't do it. Now, whether or not that means the Maple Leafs will go out there and start trading away their firsts and Knies and all this stuff, or any defensemen coming in here onto the trade market, remains to be seen. We've got ourselves, 25-ish hours left in the trade saga of 2022, and then we have ourselves the trade deadline, so it's going to be cool to see all the videos and all the conversations popping up about the Maple Leafs and all the other teams then when it happens. But either way, let me know in the comments all your thoughts about Matthew Knies, multiple firsts, Brandon Hagel, Marc-Andre Fleury, Petr Mrazek, this entire trade that seemed like it would have been able to go down, but the Toronto Maple Leafs just backed away from. Do you like the idea of Marc-Andre Fleury and Brandon Hagel coming over to Toronto? One thing we actually didn't talk about in this entire video, and I'm now only realizing it towards the end here, Brandon Hagel would have probably been, super, super valuable. I know we just said that it balanced out with the Tampa deal because of what the Tampa Bay Lightning gave up and the picks and all that being probably more valuable on the Toronto side, but, Brandon Hagel is making such a cheap amount of money for the next few seasons, and it perfectly aligns with what Matthews and Marner and their contracts are pretty much going for right now. Brandon Hagel could be a top 6 guy, I think, on the Toronto Maple Leafs if you really wanted to go out there and force the issue with that, and he's making less than $2 million, so that's pretty good. Let me know in the comments either way all your thoughts about these players and how they would match up in a trade. I hope you enjoyed this video of Trolls 99. I want to see Darren Dreger going out there and make more tweets about trades that almost happened or that were being discussed to happening but that just didn't happen because of one reason or another. I love this kind of stuff. And bye.